Welcome to the Mystery and History channel. Be sure to subscribe and like so you don't miss out on more videos like this one. On January 1st, 1966, near Bao Tri, about 20 miles west of Saigon, Vietnamese women and children sought shelter in a muddy canal during an American operation against a Viet Cong position. To escape intense gunfire, civilians were guided by paratroopers of the 173rd Airborne Brigade through dangerous areas. The episode shows how local families became trapped between displacement, military actions, and attempts at protection during the Vietnam War. Near the border with Laos on May 19, 1969, an American paratrooper wounded during the battle for Hamburger Hill waited for medical evacuation at a base camp. The confrontation took place on Hill 937 in the A Shau Valley, a strategic area of the Vietnam War. The operation involved intense actions between American forces, South Vietnamese troops, and North Vietnamese forces, becoming one of the best-known episodes of that year. Through the damaged streets of Hue in February 1968, Vietnamese civilians tried to move forward while carrying belongings, children, and essential objects during the Tet Offensive. The city was one of the most affected places of that period, with entire neighborhoods marked by intense fighting and population displacement. Among rubble, broken facades, and uncertainty, families searched for shelter, food, and safety as war turned urban routine into daily survival. The use of napalm in Cát Tâm on August 28, 1968, reflects the intensity of the Vietnam War. Cát Tâm housed a United States Special Forces camp that was frequently pressured by Viet Cong fighters using guerrilla tactics against American military power. The episode shows the harshness of the conflict, with incendiary weapons causing harm to people and the environment, revealing the strain that would lead to the American withdrawal and Vietnam's reunification in 1975. The use of C-123 Ranch Hand aircraft to spray defoliants over the dense vegetation of South Vietnam in September 1965 marked a controversial tactic in the Vietnam War, aiming to remove the natural cover that protected communist forces. These operations, covering wide areas, caused serious environmental damage and health impacts on local populations, sparking global debates about the limits of chemical agents in war and their humanitarian consequences. Residents of Dong Xoai had to seek shelter in bunkers during the Vietnam War, facing intense actions between South Vietnamese troops and the Viet Cong in June 1965. After 2 days of air attacks and clashes, the city suffered serious damage, leaving civilians affected and shaken. This episode illustrates the severe impact of the conflict on the local population, marked by instability and constant hardship. The 101st Airborne Division played an important role in the Vietnam War, conducting patrol and evacuation missions in regions such as Hue. In April 1968, after 5 days of patrol, soldiers faced dense vegetation and difficult terrain to evacuate wounded comrades, showing the complexity of missions and the importance of air evacuation in protecting troops during the conflict. This action revealed the human cost of the war. In the Nam Can forest of the Mekong Delta, groups linked to Vietnamese resistance used masks to protect their identities in case they were captured or interrogated during the Vietnam War. Amid mangrove swamps, narrow paths, and constant surveillance, taking and sending photographs to the north was a risky task. According to the photographer, many images were lost, damaged, or confiscated before reaching their destination. The American operation in My Son, near Da Nang, on April 25, 1965, showed the complexity of the conflict in Vietnam, with American troops advancing through villages against the Viet Cong. Many Vietnamese families carrying children toward safer areas lived under tension and insecurity, reflecting the social impact of the war. The cautious resistance of residents revealed distrust and the marks left by foreign intervention. During the battle for Saigon, American soldiers gave aid to a Viet Cong combatant after days of fighting. Even on opposite sides of the war, moments like this revealed gestures of humanity amid disorder, when water, basic care, and immediate support could be offered on the spot. The scene shows how the Vietnam War also produced encounters marked by compassion, exhaustion, and shared suffering between adversaries. In the An Lao Valley, South Vietnam, on April 14, 1967, a soldier of the United States 1st Cavalry Division used a flamethrower during an operation against Viet Cong fighters in a cave. This episode shows the harshness and controversial tactics of the Vietnam War, revealing the difficulty Americans faced against guerrilla forces in hostile terrain, which generated international debate and moral strain that influenced the United States' withdrawal. In the Mekong Delta in 1973, a 24-year-old Viet Cong member stood guard in a region shaped by the Vietnam War. According to the photographer, women like her were present in many parts of the conflict, taking on roles in surveillance, support, and defense. Widowed twice after losing husbands who were also soldiers, her story reflected the weight of war on young women, families, and communities involved in the prolonged struggle. During actions in Hue in 1968, an American soldier with his head bandaged is guided by another service member toward the evacuation area near a helicopter. The scene shows the urgency of moving wounded combatants to medical care during the Tet Offensive. Without emphasizing direct confrontation, the record reveals dependence between comrades, physical exhaustion, and small gestures of support that emerged amid the urban disorder of the Vietnam War. Henry Huet's photographs during the Vietnam War revealed the hardship and suffering of the jungle conflict between the 1960s and 1970s. Huet, a renowned photographer of the war, documented the reality of American soldiers and civilians, becoming a visual voice against military involvement. His images, showing operations, wounded soldiers, and hostile terrain, influenced public opposition to United States involvement in Vietnam and global perception of the war's impact. In February 1968, the former capital of Hue was retaken by American and South Vietnamese troops after weeks of fighting during the Tet Offensive. The city, occupied by Communist forces at the beginning of the offensive, became one of the most symbolic points of the Vietnam War. Even as actions continued in other regions, Hue marked the most intense outcome of Tet and increased public doubts in the United States about the direction of the war. In the South China Sea in April 1975, military personnel pushed helicopters off the decks during Operation Frequent Wind. The evacuation removed thousands of people from Saigon as North Vietnamese forces advanced on the city. With little space on the ships, aircraft were pushed into the sea to allow new landings. At 7:53 in the morning on April 30th, the final helicopter left the American embassy. The A-1 Sky Raider played a crucial role in the Vietnam War, especially in air operations against Viet Cong positions in the jungle. On December 26, 1964, it carried out attacks with 500-pound bombs against camouflaged bases and communist movement points. The air action aimed to contain Viet Cong advances, highlighting the asymmetric conflict that shaped military strategies until the end of the war in 1975. The entry of a North Vietnamese tank into the presidential palace in Saigon on April 30, 1975, symbolized the end of the Vietnam War, closing more than a decade of intense conflict and political division. This moment marked the fall of South Vietnam and the communist victory, which led to the country's reunification in 1976 under the name Socialist Republic of Vietnam. The episode had deep geopolitical consequences, directly affecting the Cold War and the regional balance in Asia. About 38 miles northeast of Saigon, refugees tried to board a Chinook helicopter as it took off after dropping supplies for troops along Highway 1. The scene shows the distress of civilians fleeing during the final years of the Vietnam War, when mass displacement, insecurity, and the lack of safe routes led families to seek any chance of escape. The size of the aircraft contrasted with the vulnerability of the people trying to reach protection. On March 8, 1965, about 2,000 American Marines landed in Da Nang to protect the nearby air base, marking the arrival of the first United States combat troops in Vietnam. The deployment greatly expanded American involvement in the war, turning a presence previously focused on military advisors into direct participation in the conflict. From that point, the number of soldiers would grow rapidly. In mid-April 1975, American journalists were taken to Xuan Loc, a small provincial capital that was becoming one of South Vietnam's last points of resistance before the fall of Saigon. The presence of the press followed the rapid collapse of South Vietnamese lines as helicopters, soldiers, and civilians moved amid urgency. The episode symbolizes the final days of the Vietnam War, marked by withdrawal, uncertainty, and the advance of Northern forces. During the Battle of Khe Sanh in 1968, United States Marines defended the base against forces of the North Vietnamese Army in a siege that lasted more than 2 months. The region was marked by bombing, trenches, smoke, and difficult conditions as soldiers tried to hold strategic positions near the demilitarized zone. The confrontation became one of the most remembered and tense episodes of the Vietnam War. In the Mekong Delta, about 13 miles northeast of Can Tho, South Vietnamese soldiers advanced in sampans under a sudden monsoon rain on January 10, 1966. The group was part of a company of about 130 men during a dawn operation against a Viet Cong camp. The region was flooded, making rivers essential routes for movement, surprise, and local support during the Vietnam War. 2 Marines rest exhausted in the mud during rain at Con Thien on October 2, 1967, a strategic point on the front line of the Vietnam War. This area near the demilitarized zone was marked by intense attacks and surprise actions from North Vietnam, reflecting the physical and emotional strain on American troops in a prolonged and controversial war that deeply shaped the global political and social landscape. Huyen Thanh Mai was a Vietnamese photographer who intensely documented the conflict in Vietnam during the 1960s, following troops through the difficult terrain of the Mekong Delta. On October 13, 1965, during an intense battle, he lost his life while working, showing the high price faced by journalists. His professional legacy and courage were continued by his brother, Nick Ut, also an Associated Press photographer who captured iconic images of the hardships experienced in the Vietnam War. Larry Burroughs was a renowned photojournalist who covered the Vietnam War, capturing powerful images from that period. In 1970, in Cambodia, during an American operation, he documented the rescue of wounded soldiers, showing the drama experienced on the ground. His work revealed the harshness of the war to audiences around the world. In 1971, he lost his life while covering the withdrawal of American troops, symbolizing the dangers faced by correspondents. On July 17, 1963, in front of Kiak Minh Pagoda in Saigon, Buddhist monks and women tried to remove a barbed wire barrier placed to contain a demonstration. The protest was part of the Buddhist crisis against the government of Ngo Dinh Diem, accused of religious and political persecution. Police action increased public tension and forced entries into temples the following month, intensified opposition to the South Vietnamese regime even further. Robert L. Sturm was a United States Air Force pilot who became notable during the Vietnam War, where he was captured and endured 5 years as a prisoner in Hanoi under extreme conditions. His case symbolized the courage of American aviators, strengthening troop morale and influencing policies regarding prisoners. After his release in 1973, he continued to serve actively and contributed to the development of air warfare while helping preserve the memory of the conflict. American soldiers in the tropical jungle evoked the setting of the Vietnam War, a prolonged conflict from 1955 to 1975 that involved the United States as part of the struggle against communist expansion in Southeast Asia. This war was marked by combat in difficult forest terrain, relentless guerrilla warfare, and deep impacts on American and world public opinion, contributing to debates over military ethics, foreign policy, and the human cost of ideological conflicts in the 20th century. During the siege of Khe Sanh in 1968, an American soldier held a dog in his arms while the base faced tension, isolation, and constant pressure. In the middle of one of the longest confrontations of the Vietnam War, small gestures of care helped ease the weight of military routine. The animal's presence brought a rare moment of affection, reminding viewers that even in combat zones, soldiers searched for comfort, connection, and humanity. About 10 miles south of Da Nang, South Vietnam, soldiers of the United States 1st Cavalry Division protected Vietnamese children in a trench during a military action. Amid tension, dust, and the sound of weapons, the soldiers tried to keep civilians low and away from danger. The scene summarizes how the Vietnam War directly affected local families, especially children caught between military operations and the search for safety. In North Vietnam in 1954, very young combatants appeared mobilized in the Red River Delta during the advance of Viet Minh forces. Their simple uniforms and equipment strapped to the body reveal how the war involved different layers of society, including teenagers recruited or linked to local militias. The episode belongs to the end of the First Indochina War, a period marked by the collapse of French rule and Vietnam's political reorganization. Lyndon B. Johnson, President of the United States from 1963 to 1969, advanced social reforms while also escalating the Vietnam War. His administration was known for the Great Society, a program against poverty, and for the expansion of civil rights, while facing controversy over the intensification of the conflict in Southeast Asia. Charles Robb, future senator and Johnson's son-in-law, also became part of American politics in the complex 1960s. During Operation Hastings on July 21, 1966, in the demilitarized zone between North Vietnam and South Vietnam, American service members faced extreme weather and terrain conditions. The episode highlights solidarity among United States Marines, marked by exhaustion and physical hardship under intense heat. The operation aimed to contain advances by the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese troops, intensifying a war that shaped global politics. In 1968, during the Vietnam War, long-range reconnaissance patrols of the Army of the Republic of Vietnam depended on UH-1 Iroquois helicopters to leave dangerous areas quickly. In an extraction under pressure, the aircraft from No. 9 Squadron of the Royal Australian Air Force had to hover while soldiers boarded in a rush. Missions like this required precise coordination, armed support, and only seconds to remove the patrol safely. During night operations in South Vietnam in 1964, tracer fire lit up the sky as American and South Vietnamese troops moved through the darkness. This type of ammunition left visible trails, helping soldiers guide fire and identify directions during confrontations. The colorized image shows how the war also unfolded at night, in low visibility environments where light, sound, and movement had great importance on the battlefield. The ceasefire announcement on January 28, 1973, marked a crucial moment in the Paris Peace Accords, which sought to end the Vietnam War, a conflict that lasted more than a decade and caused enormous human losses. As the bell of a Buddhist pagoda rang in Saigon, American soldiers began their final withdrawal, completed in March, bringing hope for peace, but also deep sadness for families affected by years of prolonged battles. The scene of abandoned military boots in the streets of Saigon reflects a crucial moment of the Vietnam War, a conflict that marked the 1960s and 1970s. The departure of American troops and social unrest in the South Vietnamese capital show the end of foreign presence and the deep impact on local populations. This episode symbolizes the instability that led to Vietnam's reunification under communist rule in 1975, leaving a historical legacy in the region. On April 17, 1965, thousands of demonstrators gathered at the Washington Monument to protest United States involvement in the Vietnam War. The gathering followed a student protest at the White House calling for an end to hostilities in the Asian country. This movement gained strength during the 1960s, intensifying public debate over American foreign policy and influencing world opinion, contributing to growing pressure to end the conflict. Members of the Student Mobilization Committee held a protest on December 5, 1967, in front of the Armed Forces Recruiting Center on Whitehall Street in New York during Stop the Draft Week. The movement expressed resistance to recruitment for the Vietnam War, showing popular opposition to the conflict and generating debates about civil rights, individual freedom, and the relationship between American politics and youth. The Solidarity March in Berkeley gathered about 3,000 people to protest the Vietnam War, reflecting the growing peace movement in the United States during the 1960s. Centered on Shattuck Avenue, with thousands in Freedom Plaza, the demonstration expressed civil society's dissatisfaction with the escalation of the conflict in Southeast Asia, which shaped American domestic politics and fueled debates over civil rights, militarism, and freedom of expression. North Vietnamese troops used the Ho Chi Minh Trail, a network of paths through the Truong Son Mountains, to transport supplies during the Vietnam War between the 1960s and 1970s. This strategic route sustained communist resistance against the United States and South Vietnamese allies, enduring bombing and geographic challenges. The trail's success prolonged the conflict and influenced the political outcome of the region. Along the Ho Chi Minh Trail, soldiers of the North Vietnamese Army moved through mountains, forests, and difficult paths toward the south during the Vietnam War. The route was a strategic network of trails, hiding places, and supply points used to transport troops, equipment, and supplies. Even under air attacks and severe conditions, the path maintained the connection between the north and military fronts, becoming one of the central elements of the conflict. The Ham Rong Bridge in North Vietnam played a crucial strategic role in the Vietnam War because of transportation across the Ma River. United States bombing aimed at interrupting Viet Cong supply routes damaged the structure. Local workers repaired the bridge, which was protected by Vietnamese resistance forces. The struggle to keep it functioning reflects the harshness of the conflict and the strategies used to control vital resources in the 1960s. In the Xuan Loc region of South Vietnam, Chinook helicopters of the South Vietnamese Air Force transported supplies during the Battle of April 1975. The city, located in Dong Nai province, became one of the last major defensive lines before the fall of Saigon. The aircraft carried cargo, reinforcements, and logistical support amid dusty roads, showing the importance of air transport in the final days of the Vietnam War. Through the canals near the Saigon River, Viet Cong members traveled in small boats during the Vietnam War. Camouflage made with foliage helped combatants blend into the vegetation along the banks, while automatic equipment was used during patrols and movements. These river routes were important for transportation, surveillance, and quick actions, showing how the terrain of southern Vietnam influenced guerrilla tactics. A Viet Cong soldier poses in front of an improvised bamboo bunker, showing guerrilla strategy in Vietnam between the 1950s and 1970s. The Viet Cong resisted American and South Vietnamese forces by using surprise tactics and camouflage structures to avoid opposing attacks. This way of operating prolonged the war and influenced Cold War geopolitics, leaving a complex legacy about foreign interventions and armed movements. In the Mekong Delta during the Vietnam War, machine gun operators had to cross streams, rice fields, and flooded areas while keeping their equipment above the water to prevent failures and preserve operational capacity. The weight of the gear made every movement slower and riskier, especially in deep mud and currents. In these operations, protecting the machine gun was essential for giving cover to the group and maintaining patrol security. Near Ben Cat, South Vietnam, in 1965, American paratroopers crossed a river during the monsoon season, when heavy rains turned movement into a slow and risky task. Holding weapons and equipment above the water, the soldiers moved through currents, mud, and dense vegetation. The scene reveals how the tropical climate influenced military operations, making patrols, transport, and communication more difficult during the Vietnam War. Soldiers during the Vietnam War used colored smoke to mark positions, signal movements, or create protective screens against opposing actions, a common tactic between the 1960s and 1970s. This conflict, involving American and Viet Cong forces, deeply marked military and social history, highlighting the use of technology and innovative field strategies, as well as severe impacts on civilians and the global press that exposed the effects of the war. About 30 miles south of Da Nang, on July 13, 1967, an American soldier moved through an operation with the phrase, "Make war not love," written on his helmet. During the Vietnam War, many service members personalized their helmets with nicknames, ironic phrases, hometown names, or protest messages. These markings worked as individual expression within military discipline and revealed humor, tension, homesickness, and emotional strain. The Vietnam War stood out for the recruitment of young soldiers with an average age of 19, lower than the average age of World War II combatants, which was 26. These young men faced difficult frontline conditions, living in tents and dealing with guerrilla warfare and strong emotional pressure. The mass deployment of young combatants affected American society and generated debates about the ethics of recruitment. American soldiers in the Vietnam War rest beneath an improvised peace flag in 1971 near the border with Laos. While covering South Vietnamese troops in operations inside Laos, the conflict crossed geographic borders and became part of the secret war against communism in Southeast Asia. The United States' presence in this context increased global political tensions and had a lasting impact on the region and international public opinion. Among the dense foliage around Binh Gia, South Vietnam, South Vietnamese troops rested in January 1965 beside American advisors. The group had spent the night in a watch position, waiting for a possible Viet Cong action that did not happen. Light passing through the trees reveals a rare pause amid the tension of the Vietnam War, when small villages and forested areas became important points of observation and combat. Laotian guerrillas played a crucial role by carrying supplies for North Vietnamese troops near Route 9 in southern Laos during Operation Lam Son 719 in 1971. This South Vietnamese offensive, with limited support from the United States, aimed to cut communist supply lines in Laos, but it ended in failure, causing chaos and a disorganized withdrawal by Southern forces. The action exposed the military and strategic difficulties of the Vietnam War. During the siege of Khe Sanh in 1968, even simple tasks like shaving had to take place inside trenches surrounded by sandbags and mud. United States Marines tried to maintain some personal routine while the base remained under constant pressure during the Vietnam War. These ordinary moments reveal how hygiene, rest, and discipline helped soldiers preserve a sense of normality amid days of tension and isolation. In July 1970, at Fire Support Base Catherine, south of Vietnam's demilitarized zone, soldiers of the 3rd Brigade of the 101st Airborne Division tried to preserve moments of relaxation within military routine. Among bunkers, sandbags, helicopters, and training, music, conversations, and improvised jokes helped ease tension, strengthen group unity, and create a brief sense of normal life inside a base exposed to the conflict. Carol Baker and Bob Hope took part in the United Service Organization's Christmas Time show on January 3, 1966, in Vung Tau, South Vietnam, during the Vietnam War. These shows raised the morale of American forces in a setting marked by constant tension. Bob Hope, known for bringing encouragement to service members, helped maintain soldiers' connection with home, while Carol Baker represented American prestige and cultural outreach. The United Service Organizations was created in 1941 to provide morale and recreational support to American troops during World War II, continuing its work in later conflicts. By promoting shows and social services, the organization brought civilians and military personnel closer together, influencing soldiers' well-being and strengthening national spirit. Its cultural impact raised morale and unity in wartime, shaping the relationship between armed forces and civil society in the 20th century. Gary C. Huested is associated with visual records of the Vietnam War, a conflict that marked the 1960s and 1970s with political, social, and military impacts in Asia. The presence of soldiers in uniform and typical military band instruments, possibly in a camp in Cambodia, suggests participation in morale activities or ceremonial events, showing a complex war involving cross-border operations and the American presence in the region. David L. Cruz, involved in military operations during the Vietnam War, illustrates interactions between the armed forces and local culture in Da Nang, where Marble Mountain is a spiritual and historical symbol. On July 17, 1969, during the Apollo mission to the Moon, the American military presence reflected Cold War tensions, while Buddhist statues in the caves symbolized cultural endurance amid conflict. This duality marked the course of the war and its political and social legacy. Brazilian soldiers traveling during guerrilla warfare in the Vietnam War between 1965 and 1975 faced enormous challenges in the dense tropical region. The guitar, present as a companion on long journeys, became a symbol of resilience and culture amid the conflict. Despite distance and cultural shock, these service members maintained bonds of camaraderie and hope, marking a little-known chapter of Brazilian actions in the context of the Cold War and international geopolitical tensions. During the Vietnam War, soldiers faced harsh conditions, including river crossings during military operations. In Trang Bang, a region of intense fighting, troops used improvised methods to cross natural obstacles, swimming beneath rough wooden bridges. These crossings exposed combatants to danger, showing endurance and adaptability in the fight against the Viet Cong, and reflecting the difficulties and strategies of a conflict that lasted more than a decade. The photograph captures an unstable moment of the 1970s, marked by intense social and political disputes. It shows uniformed forces with typical equipment, highlighting tension between strict governments and civilian movements for rights and democracy. This setting reflects the Cold War, when frequent interventions left marks on politics and society through state control, censorship, and popular resistance. During World War II, the Arlington military base near the United States Capitol played a crucial role in preparing and protecting American armed forces. Marked by strict rules for parking and circulation, it reflected the discipline essential to the war effort. Restricted to authorized personnel and guarded by police, it symbolized the national organization and mobilization that helped lead the Allies to victory between 1939 and 1945. Brazilian soldiers traveling during guerrilla warfare in the Vietnam War between 1965 and 1975 faced enormous challenges in the dense tropical region. The guitar, present as a companion on long journeys, became a symbol of resilience and culture amid the conflict. Despite distance and cultural shock, these service members maintained bonds of camaraderie and hope, marking a little-known chapter of Brazilian actions in the context of the Cold War and international geopolitical tensions. During an operation in Vietnam in 1969, Sergeant Curtis E. Hester appears using his M16 rifle while Sergeant Billy H. Falks requests air support by radio. Both were part of Company D, 151st Ranger Infantry Regiment, a unit involved in reconnaissance missions in difficult terrain. The scene summarizes coordination between ground troops and aircraft, essential for locating positions, requesting support, and maintaining contact in dense forest areas. On the coast of Chu Lai, South Vietnam, American soldiers spent a rest day on the sandy beaches in 1969. Many swam in the South China Sea, while others stayed on the shore, away from military operations for a few hours. Chu Lai housed an important American base during the Vietnam War, and moments like this were part of the recovery periods offered to troops between movements, patrols, and missions. If you enjoyed this video and want to support the channel, please use the Super Thanks tool below. Your contribution helps us keep bringing you amazing historical content. Thank you so much for your support, and see you in the next video.